What's up, folks? Welcome back to another JS drop from this dot. In today's drop, David Price, co-creator of Redwood JS, will illustrate design-driven full-stack development using Redwood JS with Storybook. You'll get an intro to Redwood, learn how to use Storybook to create all of the components you'll need, and discover how to quickly create a secure end-to-end full-stack application with Redwood Directives and Redwood Auth. Let's get started.
Hi, welcome to JS Drops. My name is David Price, and I'm going to talk about Redwood JS and design-driven full stack. Hopefully, you'll see something here that you've never seen before. All right, we want to build a simple dynamic application. It's going to have an API, a database. It's going to have a front end that'll be in React. And what happens when you build full stack? The complexity adds up really quickly. So you want to develop things in isolation, right? You want to separate your API concerns and work on those, and separate your front end concerns, your UI, and work on those. But then when you need to add everything back together and actually make it full stack, you run into challenges with that integration. And that's where full stack separating concerns coming together can go sideways. Well, today, I'm going to show you design-driven full stack with Redwood JS, where you start with the front end. We'll use Storybook. We'll create all the components we need, including mocked data and state, so that once our front end is done, we can seamlessly go to a backend, have a full API with CRUD. And this is the bonus, if we can get there in this session, I will show you how we can quickly create a secure end-to-end authenticated full stack application with Redwood Directives and Redwood Auth. So it should be fun. All right, let's go. I want to tell you a little bit about Redwood JS before we start. Redwood is an open source full stack web framework designed to help you grow from side project to startup. And what that means is we've added the conventions and the configuration out of the box so that you can get started quickly. But then as your application, as your project and product grows, as your team grows, that code base will be maintainable over the long term and scale with you. So Redwood is secure by default with end-to-end. Redwood is a proper API. You want to do webhooks, you want to do validations. Redwood has an API for that. A lot of Rails conventions, Ruby on Rails conventions are baked into our API. Redwood is multi-client. Redwood allows you to deploy. It's got built-in deploy setups to either serverless or traditional infrastructure. And most of all, like I said, Redwood is designed to reduce overhead. GraphQL, React, and Prisma are the core libraries that we use. And for a lot of people, those libraries already give you a headache when you think about what it's going to take to set up and configure those, but not with Redwood. We took the complexity out of setup, configure, maintaining, and integrating those libraries into your full stack. So I hope you like what you see when I show you how those work together. 2022 highlights for Redwood. We had a 1.0.0 launch week earlier this year. You can see a lot more. We did 4 days of announcements and highlights, startup showcase. We interviewed different startups. We interviewed with integration partners. We had office hours, v1launchweek.redwoodjs.com for that and all the recordings. We announced a Redwood Startup Fund, and that's happening, redwoodstartupfund.com. We announced it earlier this year, and we just launched it. That's $1 million of existential funding for startups that'll be using Redwood JS in their stack. And currently, we're already at V3. That's the current release. You can go to GitHub, RedwoodJS-Redwood, if you want to see where we're at by the time you watch this video. All right, let's take a look at the simple dynamic app that we want to build. Avengers. We're going to create a team page for the Avengers. At Redwood, we are all about teams and collaboration. So the Avengers, hey, it's fun and seemed fitting. The app that we want to create will allow us to dynamically add team members. So we'll need all the CRUD, both on the front end, right? We'll need React components to allow us to add, to delete, to update. We'll need an API endpoints that allows us to do all the same, including a database schema and queries to our database. So we can have our Avengers page. And we want to do all that. Here's our end goal. We want to have one, right, simple component that's a React component that allows us to do that. This is the dynamic app that we're about to build. Here are the tools that we'll put to work. I mentioned Redwood JS. Redwood includes out of the box React, GraphQL and Prisma. We're going to be using Storybook, which is also has first-class integration out of the box with Redwood. We'll run a setup command so we can use Tailwind. And I also wanted to mention that Redwood has full type support end-to-end. I'm not using a TypeScript project for this demo. When you create a new Redwood app, you can choose whether you want it to be JavaScript or TypeScript. And upcoming in V3, the default is set to TypeScript, so you can start off there, and hybrid projects are welcome too. All right. Remember I talked about with Redwood, it is a way that you can couple in those concerns when you're developing full stack, right? We talked about the challenge being when you're working in isolation on your front end, which we'll be doing Storybook, and then you're working in isolation with your API, coupling things together, right? Actually integrating those two. That can be the challenge after you've done development on the separate concerns. Redwood has a convention called cells that we are going to use to solve the challenging point of that coupling, which is basically fetch and state. And with Redwood cells, we're going to be able to integrate those two out of the box. And GraphQL is also a bit of the secret sauce that we have, so that integration is first class. Here is the component hierarchy we're going to use in order to build our dynamic app. This will be the page. We'll have a page component effectively wrapping everything. No surprise there. And we'll also have a team member component. And the team member component is going to handle most of our design elements, right? So the HTML for design and the CSS. And then one thing that's new for Redwood convention here that we need is a way to iterate over all of these team members. And that's where we'll use a team member's cell component in Redwood. And that will do the work of fetch for us, and it'll handle state. And I'll show you what that means when we take a look at the code. All right. I think we know everything we need to know now to get started. Let's go to some live demo time. What I've set up right before this talk is a brand new Redwood JS project. So I ran yarn create Redwood app, and I set the directory to be JS drops. Again, this is a JavaScript project. I could have chosen a TypeScript project. And I did that over here in the terminal. And here on the left is my VS Code with the code base that you get when you set up. So this is everything out of the box. You'll notice that Redwood is a monorepo. It has a proper API directory using Yarn Workspaces. It has a proper web directory using Yarn Workspaces. And I'll get a little bit more into those. But for now, that's all I really wanted you to know, because the first thing we're going to do, again, I've done nothing more than install this code base, is run yarn Redwood Storybook. So instead of starting a server for our local dev process, I'm going to start a server for Storybook out of the box. So let's see what that gets. On the right side, we have got Safari browser ready to go. And when Storybook gets fired up, this should immediately spin up the Storybook server. And I'll show you what we can see here. Okay, there we go. Let me boost the screen size a bit. This is Storybook, zero config that you had to do out of the box with Redwood. And here you are. You can't find any stories in your Storybook. That makes sense. We haven't added any code yet. But look, there's already some things pre-configured inside of Storybook, right? We have controls and actions, accessibility. So Redwood comes with a lot of accessibility features built in, both the Storybook and the router, and we're ready to go. So the next thing I want to do is we're going to go ahead and I want to show you what it's like to create a page in Redwood. Redwood has some CLI generators. So again, Ruby on Rails influence that allows us to get boilerplate code up and running quickly. So let me show you yarn RW, short for Redwood, generate page. And the page we want to generate is called a team page. Here we go. This will create all the boilerplate we need for, I can show you a few things here. Our page, team page, again, we're using JavaScript. That's a JSX component. Notice we have a team page story file and a team page test file. I didn't mention this yet, but Redwood comes with a end-to-end test suite out of the box as well. And so this boilerplate gives us those three files. Immediately over here on the right, we have a team page up and running. So you can see these components are being created and shown on our Storybook server immediately, which hats off the Storybook team. That's magic to me every time. Another thing I said that we would do is we would use Tailwind, right? So Redwood comes with a series of setup commands, yarn Redwood setup, which allows us to do one-time init, instantiate, install, and config for different types of utilities that we might need in our Redwood application. Yarn Redwood setup UI, Tailwind CSS. I'll hit enter. We're going to be installing the Tailwind packages behind the scenes, and they're doing all of the configuration that we need so that our Tailwind is properly working inside of our Redwood app. And then the next thing too, there's one trick here because we added CSS, we do need to restart our Storybook server. I want you to see that we also will not have to do any setup or config for Storybook to use the CSS from Tailwind. All of that's going to happen out of the box as soon as the server is rebuilt. Give it just a second and watch right up here. You'll notice that the styling changed, and boom, we have Tailwind CSS working in our project. Pretty cool, right? All right, next up for us. I want to go from this boilerplate project I started with just a generic page to adding that team page JSX component. Inside this repo, which I will have on GitHub that you can walk through yourself, I've added a starter page JSX. And this is simply boilerplate that you can use to get started. It gives you some mock data for the team members. And you'll see it's got a JSX component here, very simple, works with Tailwind that we'll use. And instead of you watching me flip through a whole lot of copy and paste and typing very slowly, what I did is I'm going to fast forward us to, let me unstash these things. I want to fast forward us to what that page will look like. If I get rid of these. Once we add the starter code to it. There we are. And now we have a team page, and I've used the same things here. There's no magic, and I'm not using anything fancy. Let's see if my server's down. But this is the team page. The Storybook. Fire that up again. And all I did was move that over into a Redwood page component. So now, instead of you watching me fumble through typing, what I want to do is just fast forward to a state. I created a branch where you can see what happens when I bring in the team page starter code into the component that I just created. I'll simply check out the branch that I had on team page. Ooh, let's get rid of these guys first. Now flip over to my new one team page. All right. And you'll see immediately the Storybook server was running and it picked up those changes inside of Storybook. So that's pretty rad, right? And then the whole point of Storybook is that you can do your design and layout in isolation. So imagine, let's see what we got here. Class name, gray. Let's make it blue. And I'll save that. And immediately you see that the design changes happen. Right. So Storybook is amazing. I highly recommend it. And if the only reason you haven't been using Storybook before was because it was hard to set up and maintain, then you should take Redwood for a spin. Let me get back to my state there. Was it gray? I forget what that thing was. Okay. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. So now the next thing we need to do, if you recall, I talked about going from a page, that would be our component. Then we'll have a cell component, and that component is going to do the work for us, the heavy lifting around fetch and managing state. I haven't shown you what that means yet. And then also we'll need a component for individual team members. Remember, I showed you on that layout, and that will be where we do the design for specific team members. Again, instead of you watching me fumble through a lot of copy and paste and writing code slowly, I'm going to switch this branch. This was the step 2 with the team member cell. I might need to rebuild my Storybook server here. But what you'll see now is I have 3 components that are created. And if I look down here, we have a team member, and this is our design component, right? So for an individual team member. And I want to show you something new here. This is a cell component, and empty seems kind of strange, but think about the state you need to manage when you're actually fetching the data. It will be empty for a while, or it might not be empty for a while. You might not actually have any data to fetch, so you need to handle that in your React component, or you need to handle errors, you need to handle loading, and you need to handle success. So somehow behind the scenes, I'm about to show you, let me give you a little bit better size here. Somehow behind the scenes, we now have made it possible to mock these states for your cell component based on what the fetch result would be. And then here we are on the generated page. We can see the entire component, the entire render of components all on the one page. Pretty cool. Again, I want to show you what's happening over here with the code that I didn't walk you through creating. You can see this in the repo if you check it out later. All right, we looked at the team page already, and the team page is importing this team member cell. So let's go look at in our components what a team member cell looks like. We have several files here, JS file, a story file, a mock file, and a test file. And this is a Redwood cell component. Inside of a cell, you get fetch and you get state. This is a GraphQL query happening for us. This is state components. It'll be rendered based on the results of that query. Pretty rad, right? And all of this is happening inside of one React component that we call a Redwood cell. That's where loading was coming from, right? The empty, the failure, and our success. The magic that's happening here that I've talked about with mock isn't anything more than team member cell mock file. And we are importing this into our component story file where we have mocked data for what the fetch results would be. And that's how we're able to mock all of these components and the page itself. Pretty cool. All right, I've got something even a little more to show you now that you understand how you can mock up and design your entire front end without having anything to do with your API so far, but you can also mock and handle fetch and state. I want to show you this team member cell and spend a little bit more time here for a second. Wouldn't it be nice, now that we know what our front end data structure is, wouldn't it be nice if this could quickly inform everything we need on the API? We're going to need endpoints. We're going to need queries to our database. And this should also inform the structure of the database schema that we have. Well, it turns out with Redwood, all of that, now this is a step of going from front-end concerns to back-end. All of that has been considered in the way we design the integration between the website and the API. Redwood has a proper API. We're using Prisma. So I'll open up the schema.prisma file. All right. Here we have a user example. Let me move this over here to the right. And that user example is what we're going to turn into our team. And again, talking database, our team member, basically our table inside of our database, team member, called a Prisma model. Scooch this over a little bit. All right, we need that ID. That's going to help us out. We don't need email. Name is great. And then image URL. We'll make that a string as well. Don't worry about these attributes. That's more information available in the Prisma docs. And we've just created a data structure for our database in the schema. It's identical to the fetch structure that we need for that component. All right, we're using Prisma. We want to run yarn redwood prisma migrate dev. This is going to take a migration snapshot of our DB model and apply it to our local database, which, by the way, has already been set up for us. We do want to continue. Team member, that's the model. It's creating a migration. So now our local dev database will have this table applied via migration. And then the next thing we can do, and I really don't want this stuff to get lost, is in one Redwood command, we can scaffold out everything we need for CRUD, both on the API side, so all the endpoints, as well as the front end, all of the components that we need to manage the different CRUD and states for our dynamic app. So here's how I'll do that. Yarn Redwood generate scaffold. And the scaffold we want to generate is our team member. And now that we've applied our database model locally, so we have that table in our local data store, or in our local database, it's a SQLite database, we can scaffold everything that we need for both the front end React components, CRUD, and all of the backend API, CRUD, so the endpoints, as well as the database queries. And we're going to do that in one Redwood command. And it looks like this: yarn Redwood generate scaffold. That's a command to generate both the web side and API side files that we need. I'm going to give this a path because I want this to be admin on the front end side. I'll show you our routes file, admin, and then team. We'll go ahead and capitalize team member. We're about to see a lot of files that get generated, but don't be intimidated. You should go and look through each of these, but it can be summarized into two groups. One, all of the API endpoints that we need, including SDL files for GraphQL, and all of the React files that we need to do CRUD. All right. What that looks like over here, this is our tree is, go up one more here. Go to the Explorer view. We now see in our source files, GraphQL SDL for team members. We see a service. Not a lot you need to know about Redwood services for the API at this point, other than that's where the business logic lives. That's going to become the endpoints for the CRUD. And then on the web side, as I mentioned, we have new components, and all of those are grouped within a directory for admin. So everything we need for team member components for CRUD is here. And below that is our routes file, which I haven't talked about yet. And a Redwood routes file, we have our own router, is a single file routes file. And all of those routes have now been added and wrapped inside of a Redwood set, which you're going to see one more time. But to really see all this action, we need to run our Redwood dev server. Yarn Redwood dev. And we're going to move away now from the Storybook design and Storybook server. And now we're firing up the local dev server so you can see what's actually happening. Okay, here we go. This is a landing page for Redwood. We don't have a home page yet, so that's why we see the splash page. And we can quickly go over to take a look at this team page. And nothing here, right? Now, hidden is an empty. That's our empty component. I could go quickly in to change the styling for that, right, with Storybook and check that out. But of course, there's nothing here because we didn't create anything yet. So now let's go and use this CRUD that we created and create a new team member. Remember, I had some starter code. I want to use some of that for some data here for our team members. Let's go ahead and create Black Widow. All right, Black Widow. We've got an image URL. We're going to need more than that for the image URL. Let's go to the end. All right. There we go. Clean that up a little bit. Looks good. Save. Let's see what happened on our team page. If I refresh, and boom, we now have a dynamic application. We could add somebody else. Vision's always fun. Is he robot? Is he human? Is he somewhere in between? Let's go ahead and add a new team member. Vision. And we could save. You can see that Vision is now added to the page. If we wanted to delete Vision, we could delete Vision from there. If we wanted to update Vision, right? So you get what we're doing. We now have CRUD. So look, we just went from nothing, an initial Redwood project, the Yarn Create Redwood app. We created all of our front end, including mocked fetch and state, by using Storybook. We added the fetch data structure that we needed inside of our cell component to our Prisma schema in our API. We created a database migration, and we scaffolded everything we needed for CRUD. And that is design-driven full stack. Forgive me, I've got one more thing I want to show you, which is how do you go from where we are now to quickly add authentication and make everything secure by default. Let's go back over to our team page, and I'm going to add yarn Redwood setup auth. So I'm going to add an auth provider. Redwood supports well over 10 auth providers right now, but this is Redwood's homegrown DB auth, which is instead of using an external service, DB auth sets up auth all within your, it's self-hosted. So you have all of your users in your database. You'll have pages, and anyway, DB Auth is a self-hosted auth solution that you can use. So that's for Redwood Auth. And that is all set up. Let me refresh this page over here on the right. I'm not going to go into what the code was created because that's not what I just show you. I want to show you what happens as soon as you add auth to a Redwood project. You don't have permission to do that. Immediately, our application has secure endpoints. And those SDL files that I talked about inside of the API, they have Redwood directives on that. So right now, no one has permission to access those endpoints unless you're authenticated. If I go over to the source in the API, GraphQL, and take a look at this team member SDL file, you'll notice these are directives for this query on team members. And right now, that query requires auth. But if I change that directive to skip auth, watch what happens. Now it's currently reloading, let it rebuild. So much for the dramatic punchline. But immediately, these are now public endpoints, and anyone can query for the team member or team members. But what about the admin side, right? If I refresh this page, now all of that is available to me, and I don't want to have any of these endpoints, but actually it's all these routes. I don't want these routes to be open to anyone, even if those were unauthenticated. So for example, if I try to save, I don't have permission to do that, but I don't want anyone to see this page at all. So if I go into our routes, now I'm on the website working with the router. Here inside of this set, I can make this set private. So requiring authentication with a simple prop that I'll pass to the set component. Need to type in a word. I have to pause when I write it out. Unauthenticated. And this is where I want to redirect in the case that authentication is done. So let's see what happened again. I immediately save that. If I go back to my Redwood app, and again, I'm not logged in, but I want to add a new team member, as soon as I go over, all of those routes are now secure and requiring authentication. Pretty cool. I mean, come on. I know that took a little longer than I thought it would, but have you ever seen a workflow like that to go from scratch to a fully authenticated dynamic app, starting from the front end and working to the back end seamlessly? That's pretty fun, right? It really is. I love doing this demo. It's great every time. So what I just showed you is design-driven full stack, right? Boom, design-driven full stack. Design-driven full stack. Tony Stark, Avengers team, helping us defeat all the things that are wrong and hard about doing full stack development. It's already complex enough. So any utilities and any integration that we can have that makes full stack development more enjoyable and frankly, just more humane, I welcome all of those. So here's how you can become a Redwood Avenger. The Redwood tutorial is the best place to get started with Redwood. Redwood JS tutorial. It's basically a course on learning full stack development yourself in and of itself. And it'll show you all the features and all the highlights of what Redwood can do for you with that full integration end to end across all the different libraries that are fully in first class integration. The best way to be successful with the Redwood tutorial is to join the Redwood community. We have a helpful, vibrant community that fully believes that by helping other people be successful with Redwood is how we make the Redwood project successful. And we just ooze that ethos and welcome you to become a part of that community and join in on all those activities that help other people be successful. By first, we'll show you how you can be successful with Redwood. And then lastly, this repo for design-driven full stack will be available, github.com, the David Price JS drops. And you can ask me questions there, or you could ask me questions, the David Price on Twitter. My DMs are open. Thank you, this dot and JS drops, for giving me an opportunity to introduce people to design-driven full stack. It's always a pleasure, and we are excited to see what you build with Redwood.